Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Raising his eyes towards his disciples, Jesus said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. Blessed are you who are now hungry, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who are now weeping, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and insult you, and denounce your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice and leap for joy on that day. Behold, your reward will be great in heaven, for their ancestors treated the prophets in the same way. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. But woe to you who are filled now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will grieve and weep. Woe to you when you speak well of you, for their ancestors treated the false prophets in this way." The Gospel of the Lord.
How many of you recall the saying, "No pain, no gain"? Who remembers that? When you stop and think about it, that saying is really rooted in worldly gain. It's about experiencing pain for the sake of looking good or having the things that I want, and not considering the cost, except be willing to do the pain of whatever is necessary. That is a turning upside down of the pain of the cross, which is a gift of love for the sake of others. Where the saying, "no pain, no gain," originates in self-centeredness and love of self, the cross represents the opposite. And in a sense, the no pain, no gain ethic, from a worldly perspective, is an ethic we really live in today. It's a living according to an earthly perspective. And so St. Paul says in his letter to the Colossians, "Put to death what is earthly." In other words, look at what earthly stuff does. The virtues today, what the world considers virtuous, that is what is earthly, are things like this: passions. In other words, all the cravings and desires that I have that can easily be disoriented and disordered, all these passions are seen as virtuous. Whether it has to do with alcohol or sex or any type of amusement, it's all about taking in, and for the sake of even self-abuse. Impurity, evil desires, amassing wealth in greed, all these things are a self-centeredness. And St. Paul says that these are part and parcel of what he calls the disobedient. Why? Because disobedient meaning it goes against what's inside of me. It goes against the image of God that I represent. When we stop and think about it, how many of you like self-centered, selfish people? How much fun are they to be around? That should trigger the alarm inside of you that says, yeah, that's not really the way it's supposed to be. And yet we have a tendency to always move in that direction. This is what St. Augustine calls concupiscence. It's the movement always toward the selfish, self-centered into sin. It's this pull that works against us. And so Jesus reveals to his disciples the Beatitudes. Jesus wants to turn the ethic of the world upside down. He wants to turn morality upside down, or we as Christians would consider him turning morality right side up. And so when he says, when he states these Beatitudes, what he's talking about is you have the worldly virtues, which I just named, okay? Impurity, passion, evil desires, greed. Those are the cardinal virtues of the world, you could say. On the other hand, you have the cardinal virtues of Christianity. One of them is called temperance. Oh, that's a terrible word. It means I have to have moderation. And yet, it's the virtue of the poor. The poor don't have much, so they have to learn to live in what they have. They learn moderation. And instead of seeking pleasure in the good, they become accustomed to finding pleasure in the good that God gives. Temperance goes against excessive, selfish self-seeking. The kind of thing that brings about a destructive life, for example, in addiction. The poor experience and exemplify the cardinal virtue of temperance, moderation, not to excess. Blessed are the hungry. The hungry exemplify the virtue of justice. They're sensitive to the underdog. They're sensitive to the underprivileged. They're sensitive to those who are mistreated, because they know that God has a heart for the poor. And it's the image of God inside of them that is literally bleeding for the sake of those who are in need. Blessed are those who weep. It's the virtue of prudence. And what prudence means is I make good decisions, but not just good according to my opinion, but good for the good of God. Good for goodness itself, not good for me. What's good for me may not be good for somebody else. And that's one of the ethics that we live in. If it's good for me, it's okay. But if it's harmful to somebody else, it's not good for them. Then what is good for the sake of good? Good for the sake of God. Those who weep and sorrow over the fact that goodness becomes misrepresented. And the seeking of goodness is self-centered rather than selfless, like Jesus pouring out his life on the cross for the goodness of us all. It's that weeping over the loss of aiming for heavenly things and settling for worldly things. Being content to end up 6 feet under instead of in the clouds on high. Blessed are they when they hate you. This exemplifies the virtue of fortitude. It's the willingness to endure the pressure, the persecution, to experience perseverance, and even endure mockery for the sake of living God's ethic of virtue, godly virtue, living in faith. And St. Paul says, Jesus brings these Beatitudes to a conclusion saying, rejoice, for your reward will be great in heaven. And this echoes where St. Paul begins in the letter to the Colossians, seek what is above. In seeking with above, our pain should be about enduring the pain of what must be sacrificed so that we will not compromise the gift of salvation that Christ desires to give us and a place with him in heaven with the blessed.
Regina Caeli, laetare, alleluia, Quiaque meruisti portare, Alleluia. Resurrexit sicut dixit, Alleluia. Ora pro nobis Deus.